As a prelude to calling up Mike Bellani, the ultimate PR guy, to introduce our special interviewee today, and it's going to be a pleasure for me to meet Ron Zoeller. I listened to his pitches. I listened to Erky Kilborn's pitches. Hopefully Philip Slidell may have bought something. If they didn't, I don't want to hear about it.
I think you already had one, or we would have been in your office every week.
And a pleasure being back here in Jamestown, where I have so many great memories. But I've known Ron and his dad for over 30 years, and he is really a hometown guy. Cheektowaga is where he was born. He went to Maryvale High School. He's in their Hall of Fame, but he never really forgot his roots, no matter how much he grew in business. And I got to know him intimately because I was at the ballpark when Pilot Air Freight, that first named it, went belly up, and the name went for sale. And Ron's company, North American Health Plans, that no one really knew about, went and bought the name. It was approved, and we put it up on the ballpark. Later on, he got involved with Business Backs the Bills, but before that, he called me and he said, "Can you believe it? The Cleveland Browns are losing their football team, and that could be us." And he saw a story about the dog pound in Cleveland and how Big Dog was crying because he had nowhere to go. So Ron called him up and offered to have them fill up a bus and come up here for the Bills-Miami playoff game on New Year's Eve in 1999. I think it was the last home playoff game probably for the Bills. And he literally brought the dog pound from Cleveland here. But that's sort of the type of guy he is. And when he called me about a year and a half ago that he wanted to write his memoirs to leave for his family, and could I help him, put it together in a book, I said I was more than happy to. But I said, look, you have these great stories. Why don't we pull these out of the middle and put them at the front and put a picture of the stadium on, and we have the books out in the hallway afterwards, and Ron will be happy to sign them for you. And I said we could probably sell them and let people see your story more than just a few family members. And that's what he did, and it's a really nice little story about some inside things that went on in Buffalo and Western New York.
I'm wearing a Bison's jersey, which I forgot that I even had. And there's a story behind this, Ron, and it deals with your guy, Mike Bellani. So, as mentioned earlier, that the Rich Baseball bought the Jamestown franchise, brought the Niagara Falls franchise to Jamestown. And with that, of course, comes Mike Bellani. And with that comes Bob and Mindy Rich. And with that comes the ever-present, let's go, let's change the world. And I'd known Mike through other arrangements, so we became natural. We created a book that is at the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame, authored by David Muley. It's the consummate book, the ultimate book on the history of Jamestown baseball. So Mike and Bob Rich decided they wanted to go down and lobby in Washington, D.C. This was a time of the antitrust, which might affect the minor leagues, might affect the major leagues. So Mike comes down and he goes, "Greg, how would you like to be my bag carrier?" Now, normally you just are. But in this case, I actually was an actual bag carrier. And we went from office to office, whether it was Paxson, Molinari, whether it was Amo Houghton, and we got to D'Amato's office. This was such a Mike Bellani moment, Ron. And you've seen this in action, but I got to share the story because he's here. Everybody in the New York minor league system was following Bellani as we were going through the tunnels of the Congress, the building, to get to D'Amato's office, which I think is in the Russell building. So we get there, and Mike's going to introduce the commissioner of the New York Penn League, everybody, to Senator D'Amato. We walk into the room, and we're met by staffers. Now, that didn't sit well with Mike. So Mike, because we have a jersey. We have a jersey we're giving everybody with their name on the back. So Mike gets on the phone, and he calls his good friend, Ambassador Gioia, in Buffalo, saying, "Ambassador Gioia, I'm here outside Senator D'Amato's office. I really thought we were going to meet him, not a staffer, because I've got all these people. I had to be 30 people piled up into this room, led by Mike Bellani. So Mike, seeing the opportunity, talks to Joya. Within 3 minutes, guess who showed up? Senator Alphonse D'Amato. So I could pull out of my bag to give him this jersey, and then he spent an hour with us. Before 15 minutes early, he wouldn't spend 1 minute. That's Bellani. And I don't know, if you've got a story or two, Ron, I'd like to hear it now. This is a roast of Mike Bellani. Give me your best Mike Bellani story.
Well, there's a lot of them. I got to know him. We were both in a leadership group in Buffalo in the early 1990s, sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. It was before his bike accident. And he helped me out a lot when we were trying to get the naming rights to the ballpark, because the city, as an inside advisor, if you will, because the city was showing bids to other people, and they were delaying giving me the go-ahead because we had the high bid. And that was my first real exposure. And then after we did get the naming rights, I felt really bad. I had a commitment, and Pat Benatar, my favorite singer, is coming into town, and he got me an autographed picture, etc. But I didn't get to meet her. But Mike has just been always there to support anything I wanted to do. When he mentioned the dog pound, I called him. I said, I got this crazy idea, but the term has been used, P.T. Barnum, several times today with respect to Mike. I said, you are the P.T. Barnum. What do you think about this idea to bring 40 Cleveland Browns fans to Buffalo for the playoff game? And do you think it'll get some attention that we could lose a team like they did? He said, let me call Eric Brady at USA Today Sports. I said, you know Eric? I knew the name. He said, yeah, I used to write with him at the Courier Express. I said, are you kidding? He called Eric the story was Monday night. I called Mike on Tuesday. Wednesday morning, Mike calls me back and said, it'll be on the front page of USA Today Sports on Friday that you're bringing up the Dog Pounders. And it just exploded from there after it was in USA Today.
Well,
he caused it.
Set the scene a little bit. You were fearful that Ralph Wilson might replicate what Art Modell had just done in Cleveland.
Absolutely. He wasn't making any secret about it. He was not happy with the revenues. He wanted to build the new suites and club seats. Everybody in town was worried about this. This is 95, and the lease expired in the summer of 97, a year and a half later. This was December 95. And yeah, everybody in Buffalo was concerned, but nobody was doing anything about it. The county was negotiating. County Executive Gorski, who I liked and we had a decent rapport. I got to know some people throughout this whole process, but nobody was publicly saying anything because they didn't want to get Ralph all upset. And I really didn't care what Ralph thought, to be honest with you. I knew that we need to keep this team, and the more lights shown on the subject, I thought the better, rather than the negotiating going behind the scenes where the Bills had all the clout. And so with that, and then we knew Cleveland was losing the team, but the stories I read that Monday night after their last home game in Municipal Stadium just hit me. This could really happen to us, and I tried to figure out a way to address it.
So what a crazy idea to get a hold of the guys who are really the Dog Pound. If you don't know Bruce Janowski and those guys, they hang around in the Dog Pound. Steve, are you one of those guys?
I sit in the Dog Pound on occasion.
Yeah, this is Steve Swanson. He's a Cleveland guy, and so you know what that time period was, and to actually germinate an idea of inviting those guys who had to be down on their luck.
Oh, they were morose, and there was the name of a bar, Dog Pound Lounge, in the newspaper, in the syndicated AP article. So I figured they're in Cleveland, so I called information, and they gave me a 513 area code. I said, that's Dayton, Cincinnati area. This Dog Pound Lounge was 3 hours from Cleveland. But I got their phone number, I called up, and I've got a tape actually somewhere from Channel 22 in Dayton, out there with the owner of the bar, holding up all the ticket sites. And he said, we thought this was a crank call. When this guy from Buffalo calls us, invites to pay for the bus, the tickets, and 2 nights lodging New Year's weekend to watch the Dolphins play the Bills. And it went from there. And then it got picked up by New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I was on NPR radio nationwide. It just exploded after USA Today picked up the story.
What did these guys say when they finally bus in and there you are, Ron, the benefactor, if you will, of all of these? What was their reaction? Were they in disbelief?
they were in disbelief, but they were so happy to be able to go to. I mean, they were football fans also. They were certainly all rooting for Buffalo, but the 44 fans, every one of them was decked out in their Cleveland Brown stuff, their dog faces. It was a riot. I mean, all the 3 TV stations were filming our tailgate party. We had Red Dog beer. I mean, it was just a fun day, and they got in. They drove all night because they were going to say Saturday night. It was a Saturday afternoon first round playoff game, and they drove all night. Got into the hotel at the Holiday Inn on Dingeon Street about 8:30 or 9. We got them in cars out to, or maybe they took the bus. We got them out to the stadium at 10 for the 12:30 start. Then we went back to their sports bar because we needed more beers after the game was done, and it was just an incredible weekend. And the following year, we had them come back again. It was not really publicized, the whole crew. And then the following year, they paid for my wife and I to fly out to Indianapolis. They drove to Indianapolis to watch the Bills play Indianapolis and paid our way out there. We had developed such a good rapport. I mentioned in the book, unfortunately, Hector Heath, who owned the bar, I had gone out to a fundraiser for him in around 2007. He passed away a couple of years after that, who had been instrumental in all this happening. But I actually spoke with the head of the travel agency a couple months ago. That was 13 years ago. That we just had a lot of laughs on the phone.
Did you did anybody take you seriously, or was it just they think it's just a stunt by Ron Zoeller?
The Bills. Well, I was told by somebody inside. We had a suite by then, or 2 suites. We'd had seats for a long time, but so we had good rapport with the Bills management, except for Ralph Wilson and number 2, Jeff Littman, who neither one had ever. Ralph met me once and kind of just shrugged his shoulders, but we had a good rapport with most of the management there. But Ralph had told one of them if Zeller's call gets through, because I had written some letters to him and to his daughter Linda Bogdan, wanting a meeting to talk about the community buying the Bills. We set up a committee of 12 or 13 attorneys, and I don't remember all the names, but in Buffalo. So we had a plan actually on a public corporation to buy 51% of the stock, and we presented it. Of course, no response. That was in '96. So I knew that that was right after the dog pound. But they had no desire over that until the lease was signed and the business backs the bill started in '98. They had no desire to talk to me or anybody serious. The media did because they didn't have anybody else to talk to. So I got a lot of calls because nobody else, as Bob Rich said to me, who I got to know after we got the naming rights to the stadium. We were having lunch one day, and he said, "Ron, I'm behind you, but because of the naming rights stuff that happened way back in 1973, we became Rich Stadium, and Ralph didn't like Bob Jr. I don't know, I don't know why." He said, "I can't publicly get behind you because it's not going to help you with the Bills, and the heads of the banks and all the major companies in Buffalo don't want to get behind you, even if they agree with you, because nobody wants to be known as being on the on the wrong side of Ralph, because they're running larger public companies in Buffalo. You own your own company, you can do whatever you want, and I think you're doing the right thing." I said, "Well, that's good, because I'm well into it. I appreciate it." And I just kept doing what I thought was right. The '96 season, we had our annual tailgate party, which we usually have about 600 employees and guests under a tent on the ECC campus before they built the football stadium there. And it happened to be, the Buffalo News had run a story on Save Our Bills. And Bud Anselmo was editor of the Sunday Supplement magazine, and he had called me and said, "We're doing this, I just want you to be aware of it." And I said, "We're going to put this postcard size thing in the Sunday paper, people to clip out, put their name and address, that they back keeping the Bills in town, even if we don't have a plan other than what you're doing." I said, "Well, I'm supportive." So we had employees at our tailgate. We had about 30 employees walking throughout the Bills parking lots with these postcards that I had printed up with the same look as the news story. The news got 250 responses. We had 1,600 postcards with names, addresses, and phone numbers around the East. I couldn't believe when people come in from Canada and Connecticut and out of state to drive for Bills games. It was unbelievable. And so there was, so the news was supportive in a quiet way, because they didn't want to get on the wrong side of Ralph. But I just kept doing what I thought was right and let the chips fall where they may.
Your license plate, I don't know if it still does, but it says Buffalo Bills helmet, and it says Fan 1.
Yeah, my wife, when we moved to Florida for 2 years full-time, and, you know, there've been a lot of Buffalo stories today, we couldn't stay, she's a Florida native, so after 35 years of Buffalo, it's payback time. So 2014 to 16, we lived in Florida. She's kind of a law abider. I wanted to keep the plates. And she said, you can't, it's against the law. And I said, oh, come on. So I gave up my plates, but I do have the old fan one. They changed the look of the one to I, et cetera, way back in the 90s. So I have an old set of fan one plates, but the newer set I had to send to Albany. But I did have them. So I sometimes get a phone call. Somebody said, you passed me on the 219 as you were heading home to Orchard Park. Reminded me I had to give you a call because they'd seen the plate. So it wasn't always advantageous to have a plate that people recognized.
Leonard Toes. And I read that story. That was incredible. Tell that story, because Scott Kinberg right there is taking notes. This sheet probably doesn't. You don't even know about this one. Okay.
This dog pound stuff started on Tuesday, Wednesday, and we had 10 days, 11 days before the Bills had a bye the first weekend, and then, or no, they had a home game that was meaningless, didn't matter. December 24th, I think it was. So we had about 10 days to get ready for. So we spent 2 or 3 days getting all the arrangements for people in Ohio to come up, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm finally in my conference room about 9 o'clock on Friday morning getting some work done with my management team because they haven't seen me in a few days. So there's a knock on the door. It's my assistant, Anne Marie. And she said, I know you're busy, but there's a guy on the phone. He says he used to own the Philadelphia Eagles. His name is Leonard Toes. He read your article this morning in the USA Today about what you're doing. He'd like to talk to you about it. So I'd heard of the name. The first thing I think of was alcohol and gambling.
Yeah, the Leonard Toes.
I mean, just because if you follow the NFL, he used to own the team until the mid-'80s, I think. So I go to my office, and he says, he explains again who he is, and he said, you know, I know you don't know who I am, but the story in the USA Today this morning says that, you know, you would comment on Cleveland, this could happen to us in Buffalo. He said, you don't know how close it was to happening. And I said, what are you talking about? He said back in around 84, and I didn't know this story, I have confirmed it by the internet since, there was a few sources. He said the commissioner of the NFL at the time, Pete Rozelle, put together a 3-member ownership committee. He said, I was having financial problems. He didn't say why, but I knew why. He said Hugh Culverhouse from Tampa Bay, Pat Boland from Denver, and Ralph Wilson were 3 guys who were supposed to help him, give him some ideas how to get out of financial problems. And he said, first of all, they did nothing. I lost the team about a year later. But he said, Ralph called me. He said, do you want to swap franchises? I'll leave Buffalo. I'll take over Philadelphia, and you come to Buffalo. And I said, really? And he said, there's no documentation of this. But I did, as I said, I did later verify that committee did exist. And he gave me a 610 area code, which I recognize as being the Philadelphia area. I wrote it down, but I never called him back. To have talked about that back when all of this was in play would have been very unproductive. Ralph would have gotten upset about it. Whether it's true, I think it was true, but whether it was true or false, it would not have helped us keep the Bills for people to think that Ralph had in mind to get out of Dodge, so to speak. I'm sure in the swap he'd get a more valuable franchise in Philadelphia than he'd have in Buffalo. But, that's the first time I don't think I told more than 3 or 4 people in 20 years until I decided to put it in the book.
Pilot, I'm wearing this Bison's jersey, 1988, the Riches own it. They then go to open it up. Magnificent day in 1988. I was there, courtesy of Mike Bellani, cameras.
I was there too.
Yeah. There's Governor Cuomo, Mario Cuomo, and Jimmy Griffin, and that whole, it was just a circus. Such a thrill to have team, AAA, and of course, everybody was excited about potential of Major League Baseball. Things were happening. And then that was known as Pilot Field. Pilot Field, then at some point it became Dunn Tire Field.
North America was before Dunn Tire.
Was that? Okay,
Yeah.
I stand corrected. So were you right after Pilot then?
Yes.
Okay, so talk about the story. I mean, you were a relatively new organization. You are the founder and CEO of North American Health Plans, which grew to 700 employees, 8 offices, huge $50 million operation. But at some point, you were not necessarily known as being in the sports business, and with a great deal of chutzpah, you made a personal call, a decision.
Yes, there's so many sports and business analogies. I was thinking about it all through this morning's discussions about leadership and heart and drive and all that other stuff. But one of the things that does not apply to boxing, because it's a soul, you don't have teammates, is that most key management decisions should be made by a team, a collective decision, not just the CEO that I was and the founder. We always had, almost on every major decision, had consensus. This ballpark league was not one of those situations. My top 5 people were totally opposed to getting the ballpark naming rights, and I outvoted them. We were raising $15 million venture capital money to start an HMO to launch it basically in Jamestown before anywhere else, back in '95, and so we needed to get the name out there. And the 3 big health plans in Buffalo had $1 million. Lots of budgets that marketing budgets that I could never approach. So I figured putting the name on the ballpark would get the name out there immediately if I could, structure it accordingly. So I think Pilot was paying $51,000 a year, as I remember, from the start. I don't know if they were still paying. I think it was a flat over 20 years. So we bid $3.3 million over 13 years, but scaled up starting at $175,000 a year. So that was affordable in our new budget, and that's why I did it. I wanted to get the name out there, and it was everywhere. It was funny. We had the week after name rights, we had our annual golf tournament at my golf club in Buffalo, and a lady walks up to me who I didn't know, and she said, "Geez, congratulations on the naming rights, and it's a credit to your industry." And I said, "What industry do you think we're in? Nobody ever heard of this company before that." She said, "You're a healthcare conglomerate." And I started laughing. I said, "I guess it worked."
Talk about golf. You actually you did some. You were sponsored and very much involved with the WCA Hospital Links, weren't you? Links
Yep.
charity.
Yeah, I think 4 years we were the title sponsor, WCA Hospital obviously coordinated all, but yeah, we wanted to support it. We had a lot of clients down here. Alan Short was a key broker, and one of my best friends, worked with some of the clients, but we were doing business with, Lutheran Social Services, Chautauqua County, Chautauqua Schools, City of Jamestown, Jamestown Schools, Vallejo, Dahlstrom. We were handling all of their employee health plans. So we had a lot of members down here, but for the small groups that weren't self-insured, we didn't have any product for them unless we got a risk product where we would charge a premium, take risk rather than the employer funding the claims and taking the risk. And so we raised the capital, and we thought we'd get the name out there even more with that sponsoring the Links Charity annual LPGA event.
We're glad you did. It's still kept going strong. And
Yes.
so back to 1998, Business Backs the Bills was created, and you and Erky Kilborn decided to take on the task of trying to create community support to help the Bills. Now, did the Bills, were they receptive to this sort of activity?
Well, I have to slightly correct what you just said. Everybody, all the
Well,
movers
welcome to my home. Cindy's my wife's everything. I have to tell
Well,
the time.
Erky was the chairman, I was the vice chairman, but we didn't both plan this. What happened is all the movers and shakers in Buffalo that didn't include me had already decided what they wanted to do. The group of 18, they called it, would meet once a month at the Buffalo Club. The presidents of the banks and Bob Rich and Jeremy Jacobs and all the names up there would meet once a month. Maybe Reggie Newman from NOCO, Stan Lipsy maybe from the Buffalo News. But I wasn't part of that crowd. I was, nobody even knew who the heck I was. So I get called to a breakfast by Stan Lipsy. I was on the Buffalo Partnership Board to meet Erky at this breakfast, and Frank McGuire, who was active in Democratic politics, etc. I don't even know why I'm going to this breakfast. And they spend an hour, because of being a maverick that I was, I guess, or perceived to be. I think what I was doing was pretty rational. But they spent the first hour trying to talk me out of not opposing this Business Backs the Bills. And Ralph has already signed off on it. I found out that day. I didn't even know anything about it until we got there. And everybody else, all the movers and shakers know this going on except me. I'm not a mover and shaker, that's why I don't know. And they said, "Would you not oppose?" I said, "Well, why would I oppose? I want to keep the Bills here. You're going to sell suites and club seats? Why would I oppose this thing?" And so it's about an hour and a half breakfast. We get up to leave, and they said, "Oh, by the way, would you be vice chairman of this?" And I don't have a clue. I think I mentioned in the book, it's like the freshman geek being invited to join the jock fraternity when he's on campus. all the football players and, the 130 pound, math major. They're inviting me into the club. I said, okay, it was an interesting first meeting.
So what was your, I mean, you had that first meeting, and then how did you figure out you were going to game plan this? Because as I recall, Ralph Wilson had a certain date. There was a drop dead date where you had to have a certain amount of money raised.
Yeah, this was around June 1st of '98, and he gave us December 1st deadline, 6 months, to sell a total of $11 million in suite and club seat inventory. There was $4 million already had been purchased, renewed contracts, etc. And we had to, so we didn't have a plan. In fact, the Bills gave us, they had 3 people at every meeting, including Russ Brandon, who was only his second year in Buffalo coming out from the Miami Marlins, Florida Marlins baseball team, Miami. But they didn't really have a plan. They didn't even have a marketing budget. We were on our own to do whatever we thought was necessary. We just made it up as we went along. Basically, it wasn't any, I think you're supposed to have a full marketing plan, come up with a marketing plan, and then go start selling after you have a plan. We started selling without caring about a plan because we had 6 months to get this done. And we just started with this, I don't know about the first meeting, but by the second meeting, virtually every reasonably sized company in Buffalo, their name was on a spreadsheet. Their name, the name of the key person who in our committee knew them, phone number. Email wasn't used quite as commonly back then for sure, but we were on top of every name that we could find that could afford a suite.
So off you went, and then finally, I mean, you do work it. You work it hard. You came down here. I sat in on a few of them. That Erky was working that down here. But did you get a sense that that this was achievable?
We did. The suites went pretty well, better than we might have even, I don't know, better than we expected. We didn't know what to expect, but they went pretty well. But the club seats were a real challenge. We were really worried about that because we had to sell a lot of those. There were 7,000 plus new club seats going to be built on the second level at the stadium. And the Bills were handling those. And there were no sales going on at all, almost zero. And 7,000 seats at whatever the licensing fees were was a big number of that 11 million, probably 3 million, I'm guessing. So, and the Bills started out 0-3, 1-4, I think, which didn't help. But then Flutie, thank God, started to play well, and we called it the Flutie factor because people started paying attention. But I'm with Erky at Lou Simonelli's house. We're running Lou is hosting for their contracting subcontractors a cocktail party to try to sell the club seats because most of the suites have gone. Now we're working on small business owners, CPAs, lawyers, that are not in big firms that could maybe afford a club seat. First of all, the Bills weren't talking at all about the cost. Everybody thought it cost them $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to get a seat. You could get one for $880 per year. You didn't have to pay it. You pay it annually. You can use a credit card, and nobody knew this from the Bills marketing. So we took over that. I volunteered my VP of marketing, Karen Marsh, who had come to me from the Sabres, so she knew sports marketing. I volunteered her, put her on. Basically, she worked on this Bills stuff for 6 months with me to set up meetings with the radio stations and Empire Sports, and I was on a couple times and whatever to get the message out. But the club seats were the big concern. The suites it didn't go easy. It was a lot of work, but it was methodical, sales every week. The club seats were at a total standstill for 3 months until we called a press conference. Erky, we're at Simonelli's house, and Erky says, we're going to call a press conference in 2 days he said, I want your thoughts, but we want to call a press conference to announce we've sold all the suites so we can focus on the club seats. I said, we got 30 unsold. and even you say that 10 are going to be sold because we got people in the pipeline, we still got 20. He says, we're going to announce it anyway, but we have to do something. I said, what's that? He said, we're getting volunteers to sign a personal obligation for these suites. As it turned out, 20 of us, I went home and I said to my wife, I said, based on how much exposure that there is out there, we could be on the hook if none is sold, and that won't happen, for $700,000 or $800,000 as our portion, because there were only 10 at that point that we knew about. And she said, well, go for it. If you have to do it, you have to do it. But it sounds kind of crazy, but we were then able to call a press conference and all the suites were taken care of because some of us in the room had helped take care of them.
Nice.
But And they were serious. The following summer, Andrew Rudnick, the partnership, coordinated the paperwork. We signed notes, or obligations, and the following year I got in the mail, no letter attached, just that paper I signed from the partnership, giving it back to me. So I don't know what would have happened if we had a lot of inventory. Nobody was asking.
Yeah, I could see explaining that to North American Health Plans. Guess what? We just bought half the stadium. So, give me what was the reaction when you announced that you were going to you had the naming rights, because North America Park didn't have the same, it's got a longer ring to it than Pilot Field. So what was the reaction in the community to that?
Well, I don't think anybody was in favor of it, to be honest with you. Somewhere on a tape that I've never watched, our PR firm captured 33 man-on-the-street interviews on TV that week. And I'm sure there were none positive about changing a simple name like Pilot Field to North America Park. In fact, it's kind of funny. We had a suite at the Bisons, and I was and I'm going to get booed by 20,000 people Monday night, July 3rd of '95, which was the evening of the Lynx charity here in Jamestown. So I had to hustle back and shower in Buffalo and get down to the ballpark. So I'm having a beer in our suite because I know I'm going to get booed by all these people. Mike was going to be on the pitcher's mound with me with Bob Rich and Mayor Mazziello. So I'm having a beer in the suite, and there's a knock on our suite door from a security guard asking me if I want to go meet Bob Rich and Mindy. So, yeah, I'd love to. So we go down to the Rich suite, and Bob and we're having another beer. And Mindy's joining us, and he said, "Do you know the history of Rich Stadium and how we got the name?" And I said, "I've heard." I was very young. I was living in Syracuse in the '70s, so I wasn't here, and there was no internet back then. He said, "Ultimately, we did try to call that Coffee Rich Stadium." I said, "Coffee Rich Stadium?" I said, "That's worse than North American Park." But it was the name of our new HMO. The mayor, when I met him the day after it was leaked out by the city to the media Thursday before that Monday I just mentioned, he asked me if I could shorten it. I said, "No, that's the name of our new HMO, North American Health Plans, North America, so I can't shorten it." I mean, the irony is that in the RFP to bid on this thing, they didn't even ask what you're going to call the ballpark. They never asked anywhere. They said you got the bid, and they said, "Oh, by the way, what are you going to call it?" It was amazing.
How was the city's invoicing on that name?
Oh, the contract was effective. It wasn't signed yet because of the negotiations, which were amicable. So the contract was supposed to start July of '95 when it was announced. So we are now into April of '96, and the city attorneys are calling us like every 2 months to have a meeting. We have an hour meeting. My attorney and I, we have no experience in negotiating naming rights, but I knew more than the city attorneys did, quite frankly. They didn't do this for a living, I'm sure of that. So we're now into April, and we're not even close to a contract. But I don't care. I'm going to own $175,000 for the first year whenever we sign it, so it doesn't matter to me. The Buffalo News, a reporter calls me and says, "Somebody from the city has just called us and leaked a story that you haven't paid your first year naming rights. And we're going to run a story, unless you tell us that's not fact, we're going to run a story in tomorrow's paper." I said, "Are you kidding me?" So I rushed down to our CFO's office. I said, "Give me a check for $175,000. I drove it downtown to City Hall, went up to second floor, and handed it to the appropriate person, called the reporter back and said, "You got no story."
That's the kind of stuff Don Elbaum would do, you know? Usually it's cash, though, not a check, just cash. Just cash. So, aside from everything else, you're the owner of the 1 millionth box of Flutie Flakes. How did that happen?
That was kind of bizarre. Karen Marsh, who I mentioned before, worked with us on the Bills thing, was our VP of marketing for our HMO, and she was always, online to the extent online what it was back in '99, I think that was. She comes to my office, she says, "You want to bid on the millionth box of Flutie Flakes?" And it's for autism charity, because I had a son with autism. I said, "Sure." And I got to tell the number. The story doesn't make any sense. So I said, "What do I have to bid?" She said, $1,200. I said, "Okay." She comes back in the next day and she said, "There's a higher bid. It's up to, somebody has bid over that to 2,000. And then the next day she said, "Somebody's bid 2,100. I said, "No, I don't need a box of cereal." I mean, we support a lot of stuff. My wife and I personally, and our corporation did. So, Yeah, I was doing it because I was a Flutie fan, and, you know, I think he was still in Buffalo, maybe he just left, but I was a Flutie fan. So we thought we'd lost the bid. She calls my office the next day. She said the number 1 and 2 bidders, when they got the go-ahead, said, no, thank you, we don't want to spend the money. So she said, do you want it for $1,200? I said, sure. So I have the millionth box of Flutie Flakes. Ironically, we got some dogs the following year. Our 2 beagles had died, and we got 2 Westies, West Highland White Terriers, and we couldn't figure out a name, and the one was acting like a flake. They were both 3 months old, so we called her Flake, and the other one called Snow, like Snow and Flake because they're white. And we're bringing them back from the breeder in Lockport all the way to Orchard Park, and we can't come up with a name, and the girl is biting the boy in the butt all the time, chasing around. We only have 1 big crate, so my wife heads out to PetSmart to get a second crate, and I'm calling for Snow and Flake, it doesn't work. And here I got the millionth box of Flutie Flakes on my wall, and I didn't think of the Flake and Flutie, so our dogs end up named Flutie and Flake, but it came from Flake to Flutie. The weirdest thing. Stuff just happened.
Talk about stuff just happening. You dealt with Mike Bellani, the ultimate PR guy, but you also early on in your career dealt with Harvey Weinstein of Harvey and Corky Productions. Now Harvey's gotten a lot of attention lately. Talk about your early connections with Harvey Weinstein.
Well, from the time I was about my late 20s, I wanted to be self-employed. I was working for Travelers Insurance, a major corporation, safe job. I'd worked in Buffalo, Long Island, Syracuse, Providence, Rhode Island, and then back to Buffalo to run that health claims office. But this is the early 80s, so my dad and I buy a bar in Grand Island. This thing doubles in business in a year. We got 9 ball teams. We got pool leagues and pool tournaments on Saturday night, and we're just rocking and rolling. So I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and I wanted to quit the insurance company, so I bought the second bar was Stage 1, owned by Harvey and Corky Promoters. I don't know them from Adam. I didn't know anybody in Buffalo from Adam, to be honest with you. So the broker on the deal says, basically, we agreed to a price. We didn't know they were going to raise the drinking age. Rock and roll nightclub. Bands 7 nights a week. The doors open at 9. The first customer comes in about 10. A brutal business to be in. My kids were like 3 and 5 at the time, et cetera. At any rate, Harvey and Corky own it. So, this is in May. We're not going to get our liquor license, but we just applied for it until October 1st. So they give us a 4-month plus management contract to run this Stage 1 bar where the revenues are going down because drinking DWI enforcement's increased. The Buffalo economy in 1982, Bethlehem Steel had laid off like 10,000 workers. I mean, everything was going down the tubes in the early 80s, or a lot of it in Buffalo. So anyway, we've got to report every other Thursday. I've got to go to the Memorial Auditorium where Harvey and Corky had their offices and report the revenues for the last 2 weeks. And Corky was very reasonable to deal with. Harvey was a madman. He was, before all this broke, I despised him more than anybody I ever met in my whole life. He would just scream at you when you came in your office with something you didn't want to hear. I don't even know. I don't know if he'd ever give anybody a pat on the back, but my only impression was just totally negative, and I couldn't figure out how people in Hollywood would do business with somebody of that temperament. I just couldn't figure it out all those years that Miramax grew, named after his parents, Myra and Max. Corky stayed in Buffalo. I think Mike even keeps in touch a little bit. I haven't seen Corky in years, but Harvey, I didn't know anything about that other stuff with women. Back then he was probably 30 years old or something. I was a little younger, I think. But at any rate, terrible interaction. Thank God when we bought the bar, albeit they raised the drinking age and we went down the tubes in a year. That's when I started my healthcare company.
Do you miss it? Do you miss that world?
I might have missed it. Was in my 30s. No, Baby Joe was asked a question today about what would coulda, wouldas, and shouldas, I'll call them, and if that bar had succeeded, I never would have been in the healthcare business, and none of this would ever happen. So you never know. You just keep plugging away, and I had a personal signature on my house from the first bar I bought. And then when the second bar when that goes down the tubes, we lose everything except the house. And I said to my wife, and she was supportive of starting the healthcare company, but I said, if this doesn't work, all we got left is the equity in the house, and we have to give it up and go into an apartment with our 2 little kids. And she said, go for it. And it worked.
It worked.
You never know.
Ralph Wilson, what was your relationship? There was certainly, in the book, you talk about at great length, he was gonna fire anybody who actually took a phone call from you, and that was a directive from Wilson to the entire Buffalo Bills staff. If you accept a phone call from Ron Zoeller, you're fired. How did it ultimately end up with you?
There was no relationship ever with Ralph between himself and me, or anybody on our Business Backs the Bills committee that didn't already have a relationship like Erky that you mentioned. I was at a Bills practice. Elaine Wolf at that time, I think, was president of the Monday Morning Quarterback Club. She was always an officer in that. Great gal. And she'd asked me for years to join the quarterback club, and I wouldn't join because it was partially sponsored by the Bills. I wanted to keep arm's length. But I don't remember the details, but I ended up in the field house one day with Elaine, and Ralph, she said, "Do you want to meet Ralph?" I said, "Sure." He's watching the practice right on the sideline, and we're 10 feet behind him. She goes and taps him on the shoulder. He turns around. She says, "Introduce." We shake hands. He nods. He turns around, keeps watching practice. Not 15 seconds of conversation. When my only other interaction I remember was when we had Paul Tagley, who flew into Buffalo to formally announce the Business Backs the Bills, and there was a dinner at the Buffalo Club, or at the Country Club of Buffalo. Because Ralph wouldn't wear a tie, we had to be in the grill room in the basement level, because upstairs you had to have a tie on to be in the main dining room at the Country Club. And he and I were at the same table. It's kind of awkward. They had 11 of us, including Tagley Boo and Roger Goodell. So there were 8 from our committee, Ralph, and the 2 people from the 2 top guys at the NFL. And because it was the grill room, they didn't have a table big enough for 11 people. So they had one table for 7 of us. I'm surprised they put me at Ralph's table, not the little kids' table. I felt sorry for Roger Goodell and the other 3 guys on our committee are sitting at the little kids' table. It was just, but Ralph wouldn't put a tie on, so we couldn't get where you'd be more comfortable. And every time I said something to Tagley, who asked a question at this, it's almost a 3-hour dinner, you could see the committee all going like this, "Oh, Ralph, please don't explode," because they thought I was going to, they knew that Ralph didn't really care for my comments. But I wasn't there to get any votes. I was just trying to keep the Bills in town.
And you succeeded.
We did.
As you look back, you very successful healthcare company that ultimately got sold. You're back in Buffalo after spending a time in Florida, engaged in the community, doing a lot of good things, and have started a new company, and have written a book, All In, which I highly recommend. It was a great read and good job. What's your sense of it today? I mean, you experienced an awful lot. What's the legacy? What's the Ron Zoeller walkaway here?
Well, for me, it's just keep plugging. I mean, just if you have the drive. If you don't have the drive, I don't think any of the rest of it matters. But if you have the drive, when you get knocked down, pick yourself up. Because it's going to hit everybody that way. I mean, everybody's going to have negative events. Just keep plowing ahead and do anything you can. But if you don't have the support of your spouse and your family, I don't know how you do it. I mean, my wife's support has been unbelievable. The 60-hour weeks I worked for years, I'm not proud of it, but I didn't let anything go to chance. I was so prepared, people would say over-prepared for any meeting I went to. The backgrounds of, I still do it. We had a conference called This Food Day about with 9 people from Cargill on Friday. Cargill's a $110 billion food company. And I've been doing this 2 months. I got us a conference call with them just because I'm bold enough to call the CEO, and I don't care who gets bothered by it. But you just keep, whatever it is, you keep plugging away and do as much research as you can on the issue and learn as much about it. Because people do business with people, and to me, that's the biggest thing. It's not corporations. The biggest thing I learned when I started the healthcare company, I thought corporations do business with corporations. It's people and people doing business. And if people respect you and first and like you second, you got a lot better chance. The numbers have to be okay and stuff, but respect is more important than anything. And just every day, assume that whatever you do is going to be in the newspaper the next morning. Just do what you think is right.
And you've done that, and you've demonstrated it and memorialized it in this book. And I know I can't personally thank you enough for coming down, Ron, and Mike tagging along, because I got a chance to revisit old war stories but I also know that, because you are continuing to work, that you told me that you had to make a conference call soon, but you still made
It's a
time.
sales call at UB.
Yeah, you made time today to make this commitment happen, and I can't thank you enough, and I just want to say thank you to Ron Zoeller, so thank you for
I
coming.
appreciate it.